Welcome to ENG 4E. This is term 2A, and we are on class 6. Today we're going to be working on assignments K9 and K10 and looking at main and subordinate clauses. I am Jillian Percy, and of course we always look at our contact info. Any work, please go to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. Email me at jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. If you're looking for an older class, capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSE. Sorry. Don't know why it's doing that. We've had this discussion before, but despite numerous attempts, it wants to shut off in the middle of my show, which drives me a little crazy, but I don't seem to know how to fix. My apologies. I feel like I should be singing to you guys or something to keep up the time, but that might, have people turning off the radio if I'm on the radio. Okay, here we go. Today's work. We are going to understand and identify a main clause, understand and identify a subordinate clause, understand and apply ways to link these two clauses together to create a complex sentence, review paragraph format, introduce the concept of a narrative paragraph and its elements, and then apply our knowledge by writing a narrative paragraph. All right. So I'm going to talk about the key question first, and then I'm going to kind of explain all the elements that go into it because it's sort of deceptively simple, I think. Key question 9 is journal writing. It's worth 10 marks. It says, in approximately 1/2 of a page of writing, describe a funny experience you have had or you have heard about in the past few months. In your paragraphs, because it could have more than one paragraph, use at least one adjective phrase and one adverb phrase to add color and variety to your writing. Remember to indent your paragraphs and also keep in mind the importance of good subject-verb agreement throughout. Okay. So I'm going to kind of go over paragraph format. I will probably talk about this until people are bored to death of it, but it is honestly one of the most crucial elements of good writing is being able to write a good paragraph. If you've got that down, it becomes so much easier to accomplish almost any type of writing. So almost any paragraph is going to have this kind of basic format. A topic sentence that introduces things, 3 to 5 details that support your ideas. There might be arguments or examples or details or whatever works to support what your idea is. And then a closing sentence that in some way restates or concludes your topic or opinion. Now, today we're talking about a narrative paragraph. A narrative paragraph tells a story. It can be a true story or a nonfiction story. So true and nonfiction are the same, made up or a fictional story. It could be funny, sad, scary, mysterious, whatever type of story you want to tell. For the purposes of this assignment, the story needs to be funny and preferably true. I mean, I'm not, that'll work. Okay, so elements of a narrative paragraph. Narratives all have similar elements that make them interesting to read. They'll have a setting. A setting is just where things happen and in what time frame. Like it could be in the past, could be happening in the now or the present, could be something happening in the future if you're writing like science fiction. Characters, if it's just a small narrative paragraph, half a page, you may only have 1 or 2 main characters who are the topic of the paragraph. Now, there's nothing wrong if you have a bunch of people in it. It's going to be tricky in a short space of time to make your characters come alive. Plot is just the series of events, the things that happen. They're often told in chronological order, but they don't have to be. And usually they'll lead up to an exciting climax or like the big moment in your story. Longer stories will usually include a problem to be solved and a solution that occurs. Short stories might have it, but they might not. And again, we're talking about half a page, so it might not have that problem solution format. It could simply be kind of just an amusing incident that never really gets resolved. Okay, so here is one example of a narrative paragraph. This is not particularly a funny one. It's kind of hard to find those out there. But this is just a straight narrative paragraph, I guess. And she's entitled it My Experiences on a Hot Summer Day. It was the 22nd of June, perhaps the hottest day of the summer, when the temperature had soared to 44 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun was shining brightly from the early morning. The earth was hot like a baking oven. I had to go out in the scorching heat to call in a doctor, as my mother was sick. The roads were deserted. Plants and trees had withered away. Hot wind was blowing. It had added to the intensity of the heat. Life seemed to have come to a complete standstill. Animals were panting for breath. Birds were silent. Since I could not get any scooter or taxi, I had to walk on foot a distance of 2 kilometers. When I came back home with the doctor, I was completely shattered and exhausted. I also had a fever. The doctor said it was a case of heat stroke. I remained in bed for a week. During my illness, I often thought of the poor laborers who had to work both in winter and summer. I wondered how they managed to bear the biting cold of winter and the scorching heat of summer. Okay, so looking at the literary elements, has it got a setting? Yes, we know it is sometime in the summer. It doesn't really give a clear idea of the time frame, not the future. There's taxis, so it must be relatively close to the present. The main character never really gets a name. There, he's just the I talking. And the other main character would be the mom who doesn't really talk, and the doctor who talks very little. Series of events, the plots. Mom is sick. They go out in the heat to try and find a doctor. Um, the different obstacles are more like the different elements of how hot things were and how they affected him. So it's kind of mild there. And then the climax is that he's got a case of heat stroke and ends up in bed for a week. And then it sort of wraps up with thinking about people who often have to work in the hot and the summer and how on earth they bear it. So again, this is a very short story, but it's kind of one example and the elements of it. So how to write a narrative paragraph of your own. Like with most writing, doing a bit of planning or brainstorming before you actually start writing can give you a better idea of what you want to say. So first of all, think about the plot. What's going to happen first? Who was there? Where are they? What's going to happen next? What are the other people doing? How does the story hit its high note? Like, what's going to happen? What are people going to say? And whatever they say or do, does it fix things or does it make things worse? So a narrative paragraph doesn't really have an opening sentence in the same way that we do when we're doing like a topic sentence. It does have, obviously every paragraph has an opening sentence. It's just trying to pull your interest into the story and get you hooked on reading it. Remember, most writing of this type, people are writing for money. And if you're not interested right away, people are going to bother spending their money on buying the books or the short stories, or the magazines or whatever. So they want to be really entertaining. So the beginning sentence might convey setting, characters, tone, the genre, or problems, depending on what the writer is trying to accomplish. So let's look at some of the ways a story might start depending on a writer's choices. Okay. Oh, hang on, we haven't got there yet. Okay, I'll slide that over. Um, Sometimes we're a bit nervous about starting a narrative paragraph. And so we end up starting it in a very simple manner, but it's not necessarily exciting. Like, this is a funny story about the time we got lost in the woods. It's like, that's true. It's just not very compelling. But there are lots of other interesting ways to start a narrative paragraph. You could start with dialogue, like the characters could be talking about one of the events. Flashback, maybe one of the characters is remembering the incident or reliving it or retelling it to somebody else. Sound effects, depending on the story, sometimes interesting sound effects can be a great way to start a story. Question. Maybe you're going to ask a rhetorical or a thought-provoking like question like, have you ever been trapped by a bear at your house? I have. Action. Dive unexpectedly right into the middle of the action to grab their attention. Character. You can introduce an unusual or a funny character right away. Mystery. Mystery can be a great way to start a story. Something mysterious or unusual or strange that makes the reader want to read and find out more. So the paragraph structure for a narrative paragraph might look a little bit like this. There might be some sort of hook or introduction. Now, when I say hook, I mean like something really interesting that compels the reader to want to read more. And we just talked about some of the ways you might do that. Now, because we're writing a very short story, half a page, the setting and the characters and the problem should be discovered pretty quickly, like in the first sentence or two. You don't want to wait too long, or you won't really have time to wrap it up. The plot, often there's two or three obstacles that get in the way of accomplishing the goal. And then climax, the resolution of the problem in a funny story that might be the funniest part, like the tagline, the joke, right? And then usually there's a falling action or a wrap up of events. Um, Not always. Sometimes, especially if it's a funny story, the climax might be the very last sentence. I don't know what stories you're going to tell, so you're going to have to kind of look at that for yourself and decide. And keep in mind, for half a page, it's possible you might need like two paragraphs to make your ideas work. It really just depends on what kind of story you're telling, right? So let's take a look at what's next. Very first thing, think about what point of view you want to write in. Point of view has three main forms. The first one is first person, and you write things as if they happened to you, even if they didn't really. So I couldn't believe the disaster my house was in. And maybe that's crucial to the story I'm telling, like some sort of chaos is part of the joke. Even if my house was perfect, which it's not, I would still state it as first person if that's the point of view I want to write from. Second person, you write as if everything is happening to the person you're talking to. This is not a really common choice because it does sound a little bit strange. So here's an example of that. As night falls, you begin to feel scared of the woods you are walking through. Ahead of you is a cave. You stop and ponder whether to enter the cave or not. So you can see it's kind of a strange point of view, but it is doable. Um, but it has to really work for the story you're telling. Third person limited. This is a point of view that's very common, and it means you write things from the viewpoint of one person and you talk sort of through them as if you're seeing everything from this person's point of view. It gives you a little more leeway. So, like if you were a girl but you wanted to write from a boy's character, that works. Or if you're really old but you want to write from the point of view of a very young person. So this can be a really useful format. Um, John tried hard not to stare at the new girl, walking down the hallway towards him. She was so gorgeous. He was trying to think of something smart and funny to say. His mind went blank, and he just nodded briskly at her and continued on his way. He wondered what she would say if he asked her out. And in this kind of format, he doesn't know. We can't see inside her head, right? In real life, the person wouldn't be able to see inside their head. So in this format of writing, he can't see what she would say either. This is one of the most common points of view to write from. It does limit you to the thoughts only of whatever character you've chosen, but it tends to have a very realistic feel that's very popular. Okay, there's one last typical point of view. This is a third person omniscient. In this point of view, you are writing as if you know everything like a god, rather than being limited to one person's point of view. With this point, you can explain different people's thoughts, you can eavesdrop on private conversations, or fill in information that none of the characters know about. Um, when Susan woke up, she thought it was just another typical day. She had no clue that it was the last day of her life. Not that it would have mattered. The man stalking her would not have been deterred, no matter how far she had tried to run from him. Now, obviously, Susan doesn't know this, right? This isn't her point of view. It isn't even the stalker's point of view. Um, it's a godlike point of view. Like in this format, you could write some parts from Susan's point of view, some parts from the stalker's point of view, some parts that are no one's point of view. It's very, very useful. Now, some people don't feel like it's very realistic and they don't care for this particular style. That is entirely up to you. If you think it's useful for your narrative, by all means, use it. Okay. So then we're talking about what makes something funny. And I really kind of struggle with this because I don't think I particularly do a great job of writing from a funny point of view. So I was trying to think about this, and I don't know if this is helpful to you or not. Things that I think makes something funny, something unexpected, ridiculous details or metaphors, word plays such as tongue twisters, sound alike words, etc. Characters who are unusual or are different, strange or wacky situations. Just the way you tell the story. Sometimes the way you pause or the voices you make, that's trickier during writing, but how you tell the story can make something funny as well. Sometimes somebody acting really foolish or silly or absurd, especially in what's intended to be a serious situation. The other thing I would kind of think about as I was just kind of reading about this would be the idea of, wait, where did it go? Okay. Mistaken identities, oops, or situations. You know, the kind of thing where people they think they're at a birthday party, but actually it's something else. Or the classic tale is where somebody sits down at a wedding, but they think they're in a restaurant and they order a bunch of food and that kind of thing where the person involved is very confused and it ends up being kind of funny the way they're confused. Remember to check that it's at least half a page. That's easily going to be 7 to 10 good long sentences. If you are not sure if you have enough sentences, please count your periods. If you only have 3 periods, then you don't have 10 sentences. You've got 3 sentences. The assignment also asks for you to include 1 adverb phrase and 1 adjective phrase. And remember to indent your paragraph 4 spaces at the beginning and also to pay attention to subject verb agreement. Hang on. Okay, so I started trying to think of a funny incident of my own. And I found it was really intimidating because just writing a story isn't as hard as, to me, writing a funny story. Because writing a funny story means like, I don't know, people are going to hear this and laugh. And what if they don't laugh? So, I'm putting myself out there by writing this story. I don't know if it's funny or not. This time that I fell in the lagoon in the wintertime, I saw a dog in the lagoon. It couldn't get out, tried to rescue it, but then I fell in. Very difficult time getting out. Once I did, the dog went crazy, leaped past me, and ran home all by himself. So I have not written this in sentence format. You can see these are just kind of like little point form or what I'd call jot notes, just little random bits and pieces of an idea. The brainstorming is just for me, it's not for anybody else. So as long as I understand what I wrote, that's fine. Okay, so here is my brainstorming down the side. And then here I tried to turn it into a rough draft, which kind of went long because I'm a bit long-winded, so I apologize. Here is how this turned out. One day, when I was first living in the north, I took a lovely walk in the woods by myself. That was my first mistake. I wasn't really familiar with the area and was just walking around aimlessly until I heard a dog barking furiously. As I turned around the corner, I found out why. He was stuck in the water lagoon. There was a lovely layer of snowfall all around, but the water in the lagoon was not yet frozen. As I attempted to lean down and pull the dog, got in, but I meant out, pull the dog out, I lost my footing and slid down the slick, wet, rubbery bank of the lagoon as if I were snowboarding. I landed in water deeper than my winter boots and felt the water seep in, numbing my toes. I hastily turned around and attempted to climb back up the bank. I might as well have been trying to climb the air for all the success I had. The wet, slick slope was just impossible to get traction on. Next to me, the dog whimpered and whined. The sky was beautiful, with tinges of pink and red, hinting at the sunset to come. At this point, the true horror of my situation had sunk in. I had told no one where I was walking, and this was not even my usual walking trail. There were no houses around. If I couldn't get myself out of here soon, I was going to end up spending the night in a freezing cold lagoon while my feet slowly turned into an icy version of concrete. Finally, I noticed a seam in the rubber lining. There was a 1 inch overlap between one side and the next. I jammed my fingers underneath that seam and slowly inched my way up that 4 foot bank with all the seriousness of a Mount Everest climber. I sobbed with relief when I made it to the top. The dog barked furiously at me, and then, in one frenzied leap, threw himself out of the lagoon and raced ahead of me. He had never needed to be rescued at all. I walked home, wet, crying, and humiliated at my own stupidity. Okay, so that's my first attempt. Looking it over and trying to see what I thought about it, I thought, first of all, it's a bit long. I might need to shorten it. It's tricky for me to tell if it's half a page here. I don't know if I described the setting very well. Could the audience really picture in their head where I was? Um, I'm not sure if I described the characters, me or the dog, very well either. The other thing, this is the hardest one, is I don't know if it comes across as funny. It's one of those stories that always make people laugh when they hear it, but I feel like it loses something when it's written down, and I'm not sure what that is. So now, before I do any editing of spelling or capitalization or any other minor errors, I'm going to focus on getting the content and the length down to the right size. Okay, so here I've taken half of it. If I did the whole thing, there wouldn't be room. And then I've tried to kind of address the issues that I saw over here. So here's my original. I'm going to kind of put it in yellow. And then here is the new version. And I'm going to put it in green. I guess because it's green for go, green for good. I don't know. When I was much younger and not so careful, I took a long Sunday stroll off into the bush with a stray dog that decided to follow along. He was a beautiful golden retriever type, and his cheerful company made me feel safe and protected. Boy, did I get that wrong. He raced happily ahead of me and turned around a corner out of sight. Suddenly, his desperate howls filled the air. I followed the sound and stood dumbstruck at the sight. He had fallen into the lagoon and could not get out again, despite his frantic efforts. I hurried forward in my big winter boots across the layer of snow and leaned forward to haul him up to safety. To my horror, I snowboarded my way down that slope straight into the lagoon myself. The ice water came over the tops of my boots and turned my legs numb. I quickly turned around and tried to climb up the bank. Every attempt had me sliding backwards down the ramp, straight back into the icy water. Next to me, my sidekick turned booby trap, whimpered and whined in fear. I like this a little better because I think it kind of slows down and explains things. I did kind of change the story a little bit. I think I actually was walking along with the dog. This is a true story that happened to me. But I don't know. It makes it more sense to me this way anyway, so I'm going to go with that. All right, and here is the second part. And again, I've got the older one in yellow, and I've got the newer one in green. And I'm going to kind of show you where I am with the green version, or the newer version, I guess. The sky turned beautiful shades of pink and gold as my thoughts turned dark. I had no clue how to get out of this lagoon, but no one even knew I was out here. There was no chance of a rescue. If I didn't get out of here soon, my feet would be so frozen they would resemble stone. I examined the bank, trying to see if the rubber mat could be pulled back to reveal dirt that might be easier to climb, but no luck. Then I spotted a 1 inch wide seam that ran from top to bottom and joined one section of the rubber covering to the other. I jammed my fingers under that seam with no regard for the pain and used it like a rope line to climb Mount Everest. When I got to the top, I just about cried. I was so glad to be out of there. I turned to look at the stray who had led me into the lagoon. He was barking frantically. I could not think how to get him out without falling back in myself. I turned away sadly and heard his barks and whimpers escalate horribly. Then I heard a large splash and was amazed to see this wet, bedraggled dog leap up the side of that lagoon bank like a soldier scaling an obstacle wall. He raced past me, back towards town, while I stood there in disbelief. He never needed to be rescued at all. I trudged back to town in my soaking wet boots, shaking my head at my own foolishness. Okay. I think that's better. I'm still not sure if it's funny, but it's my best attempt at a funny thing. So that is basically what you were gonna do. Now, what I would do, I'm not gonna do that in front of you right now because we have to go on to the next thing, is I would go through and make sure my spelling is okay, that all my punctuation is all right. What else? Capitalization is okay, all those kind of things. Now, again, this is a bit long, I think. So you might not write quite as much. And I find, again, I personally am kind of long-winded. And when I write, I tend to shorten. So possibly if I ran through this a third time and revised it again, I would make it a little bit shorter. That sometimes works for me. Um, this is me just trying to role model how to walk through this. Again, don't worry too much about the funny part. I'm not grading you as a comedian. I'm grading your writing, right? So just do the best you can with this and hand it in, and I will be happy to read your stories. Okay, so now we're moving on to a new activity, which is kind of like a new topic. So activity 3 is learning about clauses. The entire activity is worth 30 marks, and I believe there's 3 different assignments. I think we're only going to have time to talk about 2 of those assignments today. So in this activity, you're going to study and practice using clauses, and you will have the opportunity to demonstrate your understanding of the concept through a series of short assignments along with some journal writing. A clause, as pointed out earlier, is a group of words that contains both a subject, which is like a noun or could be a pronoun, and a verb. It is a little different from a phrase because, as we described earlier, a phrase does not contain both a subject and a verb. A clause can function or functions as an element of a compound or a complex sentence. There are 2 main types of clauses, a main or what's called an independent clause, and a subordinate or what's called a dependent clause. A main clause is really a sentence. It contains both a subject and a verb. It makes sense all on its own. A subordinate clause, on the other hand, does have both a subject and a verb, but it does not make sense on its own. It must be linked to a main clause. Okay. So we've talked about these before, but there's 3 main sentence types. Simple is just the subject verb and forms a complete thought. He goes walking every morning. Compound is where we join 2 simple sentences together with a coordinating conjunction. Now, we could also say instead of 2 simple sentences or 2 independent clauses. Okay? Put that in brackets, I guess, here. Or 2 independent clauses because we're talking about clauses. Complex joins one simple sentence, or what's called an independent clause, with a dependent clause. So she wanted to get a new car because her old one was beginning to break down. So here's our dependent clause, because her old one was beginning to break down. We couldn't put that all by itself. It doesn't make sense. The very word because suggests that there's going to be more to the sentence, right? Whereas up here, She works downtown, but she lives in the country. Those two things could stand on their own. Okay. So creating a complex sentence. A main clause could be something as simple as, I cooked moose meat for supper. It's a complete sentence. It's got a subject, I, it's got a verb, cooked, and it makes sense on its own. The subordinate clause, after I came home from work, is not a complete sentence because it wouldn't make sense on its own. However, if we attach that subordinate clause to the main clause, then you create a complete sentence, which will also be a complex sentence. I cooked moose meat for supper after I came home from work. So then you've got your main clause is I cooked the moose meat for supper. That's your main clause. I'm just going to underline that. After I came home from work. And that is your subordinate clause. And I think I'll highlight that. Now, that subordinate clause, after I came home from work, you could also put it in the front of the sentence of the main clause. So I could say, after I came home from work, same exact words, okay? I cooked moose meat for supper. This is totally valid. The two phrases need to be connected, the two clauses, but it doesn't matter which order they come in. It makes sense both ways. Okay. What can subordinate conjunctions do? Subordinating conjunctions can join a dependent clause to an independent clause in a variety of ways. The conjunctions can help show the cause of an event, or compare two things, or state a condition or a limitation, or explain a place or time, or state the reasons for something occurring. Subordinate conjunctions can be one word, such as if, although, because, or it can be several words, like provided that, even if, as soon as. So here's a little chart. This is not even remotely all the subordinate, they said clauses, not clauses, conjunctions. Conjunctions. Hang on a second. Okay. Um, these are like the main categories of conjunctions: cause, comparison, condition, place, reason, and time. But there are a lot more conjunctions than just these ones. These are some common ones. So things that are explaining the cause could be things like as, because, or since. Comparing two things or conceding something could be things like just as, although, even though, whereas, or while. Condition, even if, as long as, in case, provided that, providing. Place could be things like where or wherever. Reason, in order that or so that. Time, there's lots of time ones. After, before, as soon as, once, until, when, whenever, while. Okay. Here are some more conjunctions. I'm just kind of showing you some because we're doing a lot of writing using them. And if you aren't sure what words are subordinating conjunctions, it's kind of hard to use them in your writing. If you look online, there are all sorts of like 50 most common subordinating conjunctions, 100 most common subordinating conjunctions. These are the kind of things though. After, although, as if, as though, as long as much as soon as, because, before, by the time, despite, even if, even though, if, in case, in order to, now that, once, only if, rather than, since, so that, than, that, though, unless, until, when, whenever, where, whereas, wherever, whether, while, and why. So this gives you some subordinating conjunctions to work with. Have a little video next. I'm going to come back to that at the end if we still have time. I just kind of want to make sure I cover everything first. Okay, here are some examples in a sentence. The missing dog has run wherever he has decided to go. So the subordinating conjunction there is the beginning of the subordinate clause. I will get this assignment done even if I have to stay up all night. So even if is your subordinating conjunction, and it is the beginning of the subordinating clause. That's kind of the dependent clause that can't stand on its own. After I do my chores, I want to go play baseball. Now, after is your subordinating conjunction, which means after I do my chores is your subordinating clause. I want to go play baseball. I was concerned about the bad weather. Nevertheless, I still wanted to go for that picnic. So nevertheless is your subordinating conjunction, and it's the beginning of the entire subordinating clause. Okay. What is the difference between coordinating conjunctions and subordinating conjunctions? Does it matter which one you use? Well, coordinating conjunctions are only used to join two independent clauses that could stand on their own as individual sentences. I like apples. I hate spinach. I like apples, but I hate spinach. And there's only the acronym fanboys. There's only a few of them. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. That's it. There's only those six. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Only those 7. Subordinate conjunctions, there are so many. They are used for an independent clause with a dependent clause. If I had the money, I would go to the movies. If I had the money, then I would go to the movies. I like the word then there, but you don't have to use it. You could just say I. And at that point, if then is working kind of as a team there. So let me see here. If then, not if then. If then is working as a team. Okay. So we're going to do some practice of the type of thing they're about to ask you to do in your assignment. So we're going to practice adding a subordinate clause. So the assignment says, given the following main clauses, create new sentences using a subordinate clause with each. So Susan went swimming. Okay, so I could say, talk about where. I could talk about when. Let's talk about up here. A condition. Let me see what I could do with that. Susan went swimming. Whenever the, let me see, whenever the weather was warm enough. Okay, so here is my subordinate clause. Okay, I started with a subordinate conjunction and created my subordinate clause. Okay, he fixed the car. Okay, so how could I connect that? He fixed the car. Hmm. Uh, ba, 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 ba. Uh, hang on. He fixed the car. Mm, after I brought it into his garage. Okay, not super exciting, but it is still a subordinate clause. Underlining the whole thing. After is my subordinate conjunction. So you want to make sure that your subordinate clause starts with a subordinate conjunction. And there's at least 2 possible lists. And as I said, you can always go online and look for more if you don't like the ones we've got here. They flew to Winnipeg because they had a medical appointment there. Okay. Because is a subordinate conjunction. And the entire part, because they had a medical appointment there. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I hate when that happens. Is your, sorry, my cursor is trying to grab things the wrong way. There we go. Okay. Because they had a medical appointment, there is your subordinate clause. David and Ben decided to go fishing. Um, blah, blah, blah. It's easy to finish a sentence, but not always easy to think of another whole clause to attach it to. Um, they decided to go fishing. Let's see. As soon as the sun rose in the morning. Okay. So here I'm doing like a one related to time, and the whole part there is my subordinate clause. As soon as is my conjunction phrase, right? And that's fine. Dad wasn't interested in the movie because he hated romantic comedies. Okay, I just now realized I'm doing something that I was not mentioning and that I definitely should mention, so you notice it as well. So initially on this page, these sentences at the beginning ended in a period. And if you notice, I turned that period into a comma, okay? In order to connect a subordinate clause, I have to get rid of the period because that would indicate the sentence is done. But I put a comma in its place that kind of shows that I understood that that was a full sentence. Then the subordinate conjunction comes right after that comma. And then I put a period at the end. Now, obviously, not every sentence you write is going to be a period. You could be using an exclamation point or maybe a question. It's just we use periods most often. But you need to make sure you get rid of the period that's at the end of the main clause and substitute a comma instead. It's really important, or it will kind of affect your marks. Now here, they've given us subordinate clauses, and they want us to add a main clause to create a complete sentence. And this time, they've alternated. Sometimes they've put the subordinate clause at the end. Sometimes they've put it at the beginning. We'll have to kind of go back and forth. And again, we're just practicing this because your upcoming assignment is basically that's what this is about. So something, 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 because she was angry. So this person is going to do something because they are angry. What are they going to do? Okay, oh, why is that so funny? Hang on a second. My font went all strange here. Let's see if I can get it back. What's this font? No, it's not 8. Okay. Sorry. I had I know if you're on the radio, you can't really see. My font came up very, very tiny for some reason. It looked very strange. Okay. She slammed the door and stomped down the steps, comma, because she was angry. So this is my main clause. And just like on the last page, we turned the period into a comma. I'm going to make sure there's a comma there. And then there's my subordinate conjunction. And this whole other part is my subordinate clause. After dropping the kids off at school, so somebody's going to do something after dropping the kids off at school. After dropping the kids off at school, Dad went for a workout at the gym, period. So again, because the subordinate clause is at the beginning, I'm still going to put a comma there, but I don't have a subordinate conjunction there. It's at the beginning, and that's fine, just in case you were worrying that looked a little bit funny. Blank, 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 while listening to her favorite music. So she's doing something while listening to her favorite music. And for some reason, it's back to the 8. I'm going to tuck this in and get my font back to 12 for some reason. I don't know why the rest of the font is at 12 quite nicely. Here we go. Okay. She, and went back to the 8 again. Oh, well, I'm going to write it and then I'll fix it. She did her homework on her bed, comma, while listening to her favorite music. Okay. So I've got the comma, and then there is my subordinate conjunction. Remember that the subordinate clause can be at the end or it can be at the beginning. So here, because it's at the end, the subordinate conjunction is right in the middle. Before going to bed, something, something, something. Before going to bed, Mom read the boys a story, period. Now, I don't need a subordinating conjunction in the middle because it's right here at the beginning of the subordinate clause at the front of the sentence. Blank, 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 because they were all so hungry. So they're doing something because they were so hungry. They stopped for pizza on the road, comma, because they were all so hungry. Now, as you can see, I mean, obviously, there are any number of ways that you can end or begin these sentences. I'm just trying to give you some examples. And you can see if you get kind of stuck for an idea, just go back to the subordinate conjunctions list for some ideas. Okay, so here is your actual question. And you can see it's just like what we practiced. Key question number 10 is they've given you the following main clauses and they want you to create new sentences by adding a subordinate clause to each. So number 1 is Jerry went fishing. Number 2, I fixed the snowmobile. Number 3, we traveled to Thunder Bay. Number 4, Karen and Margie went to a party. Number 5, Ken didn't have a truck. And then part 2 is going to be what we just practiced. This time they've given you a main clause and they want you to add a subordinate clause. So if you see the space at the beginning, you need to add the subordinate clause at the beginning. If you see the space at the end, then you need to add the subordinate clause at the end. It's deliberate because they're trying to get you used to both formats. Always remember, if the subordinate clause is coming first, put the comma there. If the subordinate clause is coming second, put the comma right before the subordinating conjunction. Okay, so that is our main thing. I've got a little quick video here if you want to take a quick look at it and just kind of review subordinating conjunctions, but that is our main idea. Hang on. Oh, there we go.
Hey, grammarians. Today, let's start talking about subordinating conjunctions. Words like although and after and because. Because this is a pretty complicated topic. Because in order to understand subordinating conjunctions, you have to understand the difference between an independent and a dependent clause. Because that's what subordinating conjunctions do. Is they unite independent and dependent clauses. That's what subordinating conjunctions do. But what are these? You know, what is an independent and a dependent clause? Well, okay, so first of all, let's back up again. What is a clause?
So I'm gonna just review. We know this, right? Independent means subject, verb, and it can stand on its own. Dependent, subject, verb, but it can't stand on its own. You can see here, Herbert performed his irresponsible experiments. That's independent. Because he was curious is his dependent clause. Let me see. I'm going to hop over his part about clauses. Take care.
All clauses are sentences. I'll write that down. So all sentences are clauses, but not all clauses are sentences. It's possible to have something that has both a subject and a verb that doesn't stand on its own, and that's a dependent clause. We'd call that a sentence fragment. What a dependent clause does is provide extra information that isn't necessary to the understanding of the sentence, right? But an independent clause has to be able to stand on its own. So let's take a look at this sentence here. Herbert performed his irresponsible experiments because he was curious. And this sentence is composed of two clauses. In red, we've got this independent clause. Herbert performed his irresponsible experiments. And in green, we have this dependent clause, because he was curious. Now, we know that because he was curious is the dependent clause because it explains more of why Herbert did what he did, right? It is explaining the reason for his performing irresponsible experiments. But because he was curious on its own doesn't work as a sentence. He was curious does. That's a sentence. But because he was curious asks more questions than it answers. Because he was curious, what? If a clause causes you to ask, yeah, so what? Then it's probably a dependent clause. Write that down. Put that in a doctrine. So, a dependent clause should cause you to ask, yeah, so what? Because a dependent clause leans against an independent clause. It's like a ladder laid up against the tree. The tree is still going to be standing there whether or not the ladder is there or not, but the ladder is useful because it allows you to get up further into the tree and explore its leaves, if that makes sense. It allows you to get further context and further understanding. But the tree could just as easily, it's still a tree without the ladder, right? You don't have to have a ladder in order to be a tree. All right, so another thing about the difference between a coordinating and a subordinating conjunction is that coordinating conjunctions only unite independent clauses with each other. Which means any sentence that has a coordinating conjunction like but or anything else in fanboys, which is for and nor but or yet so, right, can be separated into two sentences, two separate sentences. Look at this. So, Jimothy liked to wash the dishes, but Beckany preferred to sweep the floor. Now, these can each be their own sentences. Jimothy liked to wash the dishes, Beckany preferred to sweep the floor. We can combine these if we want to, and we have. Whereas this subordinating conjunction sentence that begins with although cannot be separated.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it there. That's just kind of a quick review. If you get stuck, that's a great little video to just kind of review the concepts. Also, if you get stuck, by all means, you can Facebook me or you can email me, and I'll be happy to help answer any questions and walk you through an assignment. I know sometimes people are intimidated because I'm just kind of this bodiless voice right now, but I love to help students. That's what I do. By all means, please call and I'd be happy to talk to you. All right. Today's Wednesday. We have another class tomorrow, and then we have the weekend coming up. So thank you for listening. And like I said, reach out to me if you need help with your assignments, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Thank you.